Hello, hello, and welcome everyone to a new Power to Fly Chat and Learn. I'm Beth Ruffin, and I'm a global DEIB strategist and trainer here at Power to Fly. And I'm very excited to be moderating today's conversation in partnership with BizLibrary and Blueboard. Today, we're talking about the 3 pillars to improve employee engagement. But before we get started, I just want to go through some simple housekeeping rules so we can make sure that this is a safe and comfortable space for everyone. First, we encourage you all to participate. Turn your cameras on, drop your name, let us know where you're dialing in from in the chat box. We're always eager to see where you're located. Second, this conversation is being recorded, and 2 to 4 business days after the chat, you'll receive a rewatch email link with a link to the recording. Please note that you might show up on the live recording if you're on camera, but that's great because we want to see all of your beautiful faces. Finally, please feel free to share any questions you have in the chat box. If you want to ask a question anonymously, you can send it to me directly and I'll ask the question on your behalf. Now, I want to introduce you to our 3 very special guests from Blueboard, BizLibrary, and of course, Power to Fly. Representing Blueboard, we've got Shireen El-Maissi. I want to tell you first about Blueboard before I introduce her. Blueboard offers the world's largest marketplace of experimental employee rewards. Trusted by top people-first companies like GoPro, Shake Shack, Teladoc Health, and more, Blueboard's easy-to-use platform and unique concierge service empower companies to reward employees with meaningful, memorable experiences at scale, boosting engagement and performance across multi-generational global workforces. Shireen is Blueboard's manager of people and talent. With almost 8 years of experience in the HR space and a strong foundation in talent acquisition, Shireen has experience in a variety of areas, including people relations and overall employee development. Welcome, Shireen.
Thank you. Thanks. I'm so happy to be here. It's going to be a great conversation about employee engagement, and yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
Awesome. Thank you for being here.
Of course.
Our second panelist, Carli Cortez, is representing BizLibrary. Let's dive deeper into their mission. BizLibrary is on a mission to elevate employee skills, create better places to work, and do its part to build a more compassionate and competent future. The team at BizLibrary leads to these goals every day by supporting organizations' learning and development needs through their innovative platforms, best-in-class content, and unrivaled strategic support. With L&D powered by BizLibrary, employees are equipped with the skills they need for the job today and ready to take on new challenges tomorrow. Carli is BizLibrary's manager of talent and employee experience. In her role, she's responsible for attracting and hiring top talent to join the BizLibrary team, as well as continuing to engage them throughout the employee lifecycle. Carli, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to chat with everybody today and have a good conversation around employee engagement.
Awesome. Thank you for being here. And on behalf of Power to Fly, we've got Sienna Brown. Sienna J. Brown is the Senior Director of DEIB at Power to Fly and a globally recognized speaker. Her mission is to build a new wave of leadership focused on inclusion and intention in the workspace so that every individual has an equal opportunity to reach their full potential in both their personal and professional lives. With over a decade of experience partnering with global leaders and organizations, her work has been featured on platforms like Forbes, Essence, TEDx, NPR, and more. And Sienna has been on stages with global companies like Siemens, Bumble, DHI, Expedia, and Power MBA. Sienna, welcome.
Thank you. I'm really excited to be here in an amazing conversation with Shireen and Carli, and looking forward to hearing from all of you as we dive in on employee engagement. Thank you,
Awesome.
Beth.
Thank you. And I just want to say that all 3 of you have such beautiful profile pictures. I've got to step up my game as it comes to my professional profile picture. So thank you all for being here. Now we're going to dive into the topic of employee engagement. And so we have some pre-submitted questions. Again, for our audience, please feel free to use the chat to add any questions as we're going along. This first question is for Shireen. What's your go-to strategy for creating an employee engagement program from scratch?
So I'm really excited to talk about this one because Blueboard, we didn't start from scratch. We had a foundation because we're a recognition company, but we just revamped it. So with one of the first things we really focused on was I was challenged with developing and formulating our North Star. So I went to our founders and I said, let's look at our values, let's define them. They went one step further and said, how are our values displayed? And then how are they recognized? So we really lean on our values at Blueboard as a huge part of employee engagement. In addition to that, having an employee value proposition is huge. If you don't know why and what you want out of your employees, it's going to be really hard to build that engagement program. The second piece to answering this question is that Blueboard just released what we call our Blueboard method. And along with that, we actually have a workbook. So our Blueboard method is focusing on different forms of recognition and how they tie in with what we call our 5 A's. And our 5 A's are awareness, acknowledgement, anticipation, activity, and afterglow. So with the Blueboard method, you're looking at 3 different types of recognition. You have day-to-day appreciation. That could be peer-to-peer shout-outs. That could be verbal recognition. You have informal recognition, where you're looking at maybe quarterly rewards, spot programs, sales incentives. Those are recognitions that come to recognize high performance and appreciation for that high work ethic. And then you have formal recognition. You know, when those employees are hitting those 3-year marks, 5-year marks, even their 1-year mark, we really do want to say thank you and encourage others to be building recognition programs around employee engagement, valued down in appreciation and recognition. So the Blueboard method is really fundamental when thinking about building something from scratch, and to lean on our workbook is huge because it gives you exercises like personal reflection, looking at your current recognition landscape and your organization's 3D recognition map. Then we also walk through other things, like we educate on how to enhance recognition today and how to lean on those 5 A's, and then using the Blueboard method as an example. So I loved the workbook. We did this here with our organization to build out our programs. So it's a great place to start if you don't really know where to go first.
Thank you. First of all, I just have to say, can we add the word afterglow to all employee recognition programs? Like that is just, I love that. I also want to note that Chloe Holland from the Blueboard team is putting some things in the chat and has put the link for this workbook in the chat. So thank you for sharing that with us. Yeah. Sienna, what are your thoughts on creating this program from scratch?
Yeah, no, I love this question. And Shireen, +1, I was like, I love a good framework. I'm going to go check out the link afterwards. For us at Powertify, something that we really work with, whether we're working internally when we put together employee engagement programs or with our clients, it's really starting with the data. So I love, Shireen, what you had shared of like, what is the vision? Where are we going? Where do we see as an organization is our top priorities? And then we always encourage our clients to say, okay, now let's actually ask our employees, right? Because for us, employee engagement might be one thing or look a certain way, but then for a variety of different employees with a variety of different identities, experiences, and also roles, being able to say, what does engagement look like for them? What is their vision for what employee engagement, which will then lead to advocacy, look like for the company? And then figuring out how to bridge the gap, right? So always starting with data. And I know that we'll talk a little bit about surveying later, but thinking through what's most important to us right now, where's our employee currently at, and then where do we really need to bridge the gap and prioritize first? And I think, especially as you're starting with an employee engagement program, there will be different parts of iteration. And I think that communication is something that's so important because oftentimes when a company does it right, even if that might mean we've created a program, it might not be tracking that well, but we're communicating consistently, engaging in an engaging way, and also in a way that's transparent. And so one of the companies that we worked with, I remember that their goals were to look at the talent experience overall. And we really sat down and we said, okay, what were some of the different nuances between identities and different groups within the organization? And what did belonging mean to them? What did engagement mean to them? What was the types of programming that all of these groups needed? Then tying that back again to the wider business goals to create that sentiment of like, this isn't just something that lives on the People Ops team or on the DEIB team, but really having this be something that's cross-departmental with accountability, and then also gaining leadership buy-in along the way. So I think a couple of things. Number one, start with data, ask your people what they want, but then also make sure that you're bringing others who will be key players down the road along the journey and communicating that consistently and realizing, we talk about this a lot, but like it's a marathon, not a sprint, right? So V1 of the employee engagement program will not look the same in 6 months, in 12 months, and then in a year. 12 months is a year from now, and then in 2 years or 3 years from now. But thinking through, what does that consistency look like? And then how can we make sure that we're consistently having feedback loops as well, to be able to see what's working, what's not, what did we think was going really well, but then when we actually survey our employees, we're seeing that there might be room for growth. And I think, again, this is really important. And then Carli or Beth, I'll pass it back over to you. But thinking through the fact that a lot of different strategies and programs that have been launched over the last couple of weeks, from a leadership perspective, we're doing really well. But when you actually ask the communities that they were looking to serve, the perception was much different. So really thinking through, when you have that consistent communication, it allows for your efforts and your impact to go that much further because you're bringing people along on the journey.
You know, we sometimes can get so excited about a program that we just will jump right in. And so I love that you bring up the fact of, let's ask people, right? Because how you are engaged is going to be totally different than me. And one of the ways we do that is through surveys. But honestly, people are just feeling survey fatigue. Carli, talk to us about this. How do we get feedback from people that are just exhausted?
Yeah, absolutely. No, I definitely think the survey fatigue is a real thing. They're a great tool though. I mean, I think you can be strategic in how you're kind of administering those and rolling those out. So looking at the cadence, how often are they going out? At BizLibrary, we tend to do it about once a quarter. And we found that with that, we're still getting really high. We almost consistently have 100% participation rates in our employee engagement surveys, because we're not like doing it constantly all the time, but it still allows us to measure pretty frequently and pretty consistently over time how those scores are changing and evolving. So I think looking at the cadence and trying to not, do it too frequently is super important. But there's other ways of getting feedback too from your employees. I definitely think, you can't underestimate the power of one-on-one conversations. And to Sienna's point, that doesn't just have to come from people ops. It's not just HR sitting down and having those, 30, 60, 90-day conversations with new hires. It's not just them, touching base with employees that have been there for a while. It can be managers meeting with the people on their team and having those stay interview questions where they're going, what have you really been enjoying on your job lately? Tell me about some things that make you consider leaving the organization. What do you want to do more of in your role? What do you feel like you're missing out on? Those one-on-ones between a manager and their team don't just have to be performance-based conversations. They can be about those other topics as well, and they should be about those other topics. You can also do skip level interviews where you're having upper management meet with more of that individual contributor level and kind of getting a sense of, how they're feeling from that standpoint, how they're feeling about their direct managers and things like that. And then another, tool that's out there that I think we can't underestimate is Glassdoor. People tend to be pretty transparent on there, and for better or for worse, you're going to get feedback that way. So, kind of using that as a tool and kind of seeing what people are saying on there, whether that's from your current or former employees, I think that can be a good place to go as well if you're worried about kind of that survey burnout.
Thank you. I have to be honest with you. I've never heard of 100% participation on employee engagement survey. So we need some of that secret sauce. Sienna, what are your thoughts around getting more people to engage on these surveys, maybe in the midst of being exhausted?
Yeah, absolutely. I love this. And Carli, plus one, everything that you had shared. Mine is really simple. Make it matter to them, right? I think oftentimes we send out surveys or we do all of these initiatives and then we don't really close the loop, right? And so I think there's a lot of power in progress, and there's a lot of power in actually surveying individuals on something, but then making sure that there's a clear strategy afterwards of what are we going to do with these insights, right? And I think, Carli, going off of what you were saying as well, something that we've seen that's been really powerful are focus groups as well. So kind of tying all of our strategies together and saying, okay, we know where we need to bridge the gap. How do we get more insights? Let's host a focus group around this. And then again, when we think about creating that buy-in and that leadership to prioritize these different types of insights and practices, is thinking through how are we using those focus groups, obviously in an anonymized way, but being able to dig in a little bit deeper on some of those initiatives, because yes, we can share surveys, yes, we can have conversations, but then also thinking about what does it mean when people are in a psychologically safe space where they can actually give real feedback and share their thoughts on what they would like to see. And then how are you bridging that gap with leadership as well to be able to make sure that we're moving the right initiatives forward?
Now, we have a question that came in I want to ask around this, and this is for any of you. Keep in mind that these are their words, not mine. What type of ideas have you seen work best for old school companies with long tenured employees? So average tenure, 25 years or more, who are not tech savvy.
I have to opt out of this one. My companies I'm primarily with have an average tenure of about 5, if we're lucky. So I hope Sienna and Carli can have some flavor.
Have you go first.
Oh, I was gonna say I'm kind of in the same boat. We tend to have a lot of people in kind of that 3 to 5 year range as well in terms of tenure. And yeah, so I don't know how much I'm gonna be able to help out with this question.
I can share insights. My doorbell rang, so apologies. Remote work. I can share experience, not necessarily from Power to Fly, but from different organizations that we've worked with in the past. When we think about that, and then also when we think about what does diversity look like, that might look like diversity of age, right? That might look like diversity of seniority, et cetera, is really thinking through again, how are we getting leadership buy-in? Because for individuals, we might be thinking, or for employees, we might be saying, okay, this is really important to us, but then thinking about the sphere of influence and who's owning power and the power and privilege to be able to make change, and saying, how are we creating a strategy that makes sense to them and that's aligned with the business goals, but then also thinking through the way, like where work is moving into, and then how that can also support the business as well, right? So if we're thinking about, we might be doing things in an old school way, but maybe it's a conversation of, hey, what is the impact that we could have if we tried this out? Tying it to what would, again, make sense for the business and the organization. And I think another really important thing to think about is change management, right? It takes a long time to create change. And I think it also creates a different amount of time to create change based on levels of readiness. So like something I always work with the team and our clients on is being able to say, how are we understanding where people are at? Because our aspirations and the realities might be very different, but really being able to bridge the gap. And you'll hear me use that phrase a lot, but bridge the gap into being able to say what we know we might need versus what leadership or whoever's making the majority of the decisions might need. And then how are we speaking their language? So it might not be a 4-day work policy, or it might not be how are we working remotely when we might all be in a hybrid or in person, but it might be able to say, what's the next small step that we could take based on data, based on the information that we've been seeing, and then also creating a use case around it of why this matters, right? That would be my insight. Post doorbell ring, so I'll pass it over to someone else because I missed it.
Thank you. Yeah, we don't see a lot of companies lately that have this type of tenure, right? And so what actually we are seeing is that a lot of companies are maybe having to do layoffs, right? So they're having to do workforce reduction. How do you continue to boost morale and engagement after a round of layoffs? Shireen, I'd love for you to talk to us about this.
Yeah, I think this is a really important topic because it's been happening so much in the past year. There's a lot of, like, let's talk about morale of the existing employees that are affected, right? Like when leading up to a layoff, the decision making and all of leadership's considerations are really focused on those that are affected. you have to almost immediately switch into gears right after the layoff happens and touch base and pay attention and redirect your focus to those that were not affected. And understanding a lot of them have lost friends, they've taken on more workload, they have survivor's guilt. There's a bunch that's happening within their own day-to-day for not being let go. And it's a different challenge. It's a different challenge than those that have been let go, but both are affected. Both groups are affected. So when this is like a very crucial time to come in and say thank you to the employees that are still there. And thank you for the extra work that you've done while you are here. It's huge to have that recognition that we see that this time has been hard, communicating that transparency, recognizing that, yes, this decision affected everyone, not just those that are not here anymore, and then allowing space to provide that appreciation and recognition as well. We've seen some Fortune 500 companies actually say, Blueboard helped us through this. And that's because we offer different types of recognition programs so that if budget is affected, we can help, obviously different offerings, but they're paying attention to the existing team and saying, we actually still need to find value in them and appreciate that output that they're giving us at this time. And so to see that marriage between appreciation, recognition, and those with low morale, it's like the most ideal time to obviously like maybe catch it ahead of, right? Like in a perfect world, we would be proactive in catching low morale, but we can't always do that. So at least planning for it. Planning for those that are unaffected is going to be huge. And simply starting with a thank you goes a long way.
It truly does. And I like that you talk about how are we appreciating people. It made me think of upskilling, right? That how are we pouring into people while they're here? Carli, I would love to hear from you. Tell us about how an upskilling program could impact employee engagement.
Yeah, I'm very excited to talk about this topic because this is like a huge focus at BizLibrary. We about a year and a half ago rolled out a biz skills platform that is like specifically geared towards reskilling, upskilling your workforce. And I think the reason that this is so important is because more and more we're seeing, when people are asked, what are you looking for in a company? What are you looking for in a prospective employer? They value working for an organization where they're being invested in, where they feel like that company cares about them on a personal and professional level, and they want to develop their employees and they want to invest in them in that way. So they're prioritizing that whenever they're, looking for a job or considering their employment opportunities. And if they don't feel like they're getting that professional development, they might start to look elsewhere. Their eyes might start to wander to other opportunities. So providing those opportunities for them to reskill, to upskill, to train in different areas, it's going to keep their focus internal. It's going to keep their focus on, okay, how can I use this in my job? How can I use this to get to the next step in my career? And, where can this take me internally versus I'm not getting what I need here. Maybe this company somewhere else has what I'm looking for in this area. So like I mentioned earlier with the Biz Skills platform. So like with that, it's cool because you can kind of work together, like the managers can work with their employees on skills related to their job, but then the employees can go in and actually pick out skills that they're just interested in, whether that's related to their job or not. You can rate yourself on those skills. Your manager can rate you on those skills. You can see how those are developing over time. And then you can actually start to see how those new skills that you're developing match up to other career opportunities within your organization. So it really does allow them to kind of see that bigger picture of, this is my potential career path here. This is my potential path forward. And again, it's not just a manager delegating, hey, you need to work on this. Hey, you need to do this. Hey, you need to upskill in these areas. You're getting that employee to be bought in on a personal level to their professional development and to the skills that they're working on. So it really keeps them engaged in the day-to-day of their role and how they're going to progress in their career.
I'm one of those old school people that we mentioned earlier. When I was coming up through my corporate career, I was always told that my development was mine to own, that my manager was there to help guide, but it was there for me to own. But sometimes it's not always flexible, right? Sometimes we don't have that ability. Sienna, I would love for you to talk to us about flexibility as it comes to upskilling and how that helps retain employees.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the first thing that's coming to mind is that we all learn in different ways and we all have different interests, right? And I think oftentimes when we do look at professional development within organizations or what's offered, it might be all of the same thing all of the time for everyone, right? And I think something that's really important, and I'll continuously go back to this until like the day I die, but like asking people what they need, and then also being able to go back to what Carli was saying, thinking about how can this support them, not just in their role in their career growth, but then also in cross-departmental leadership as well, right? When we're thinking about, and recently at Power Up, it's extremely exciting. We also just launched an upskilling platform as well that's really centering around different DEIB skills and knowledge for people ops and HR leaders, where we're thinking through things of, yes, what will be needed, but then also thinking about how can you be learning about diverse candidate attraction and engagement? What does it look like to be thinking about DEIB programming internally? And a lot of these different topics that a manager might not necessarily know is a useful skill for someone to grow in their career, but being able to get a little bit of the more holistic upskilling knowledge, I think is something that's really important. And the other thing that I would just add is like, when we think about employee engagement, and then also when we think about who we're offering opportunities to, I think there's a lot of space for organizations to also, I'm imagining like a brain dump, right? But to really sit down and be able to say, as we think about professional development opportunities, how are we making sure that we're not just looking at talent that's already being recognized and celebrated, but then also being able to say, where is there potential for, I'm thinking of the word in Spanish, I apologize. What is the potential for high potential employees as well? And how are we finding them, right? So that might not necessarily always be a manager to a direct report, but it might be you're working with someone cross-functionally and see that they have a ton of opportunity to grow in X, Y, or Z. How are you also advocating for those individuals as well? And really thinking through, again, I go back to the data, but looking at who's growing within the company, being able to say what types of folks, and not just saying like race, gender, et cetera, but being able to say, do we really promote folks who are outgoing and who seem like they're extroverts, or who are the loudest in meetings, whatever that might be, and taking I'm going to say a hard look, but taking an important look at how do we make those decisions to upskill individuals, and then also how can we look at that from an equitable lens as well to be able to really make sure that everyone's getting access to opportunities that feel right for them, that support their learning, their own learning pathway. And then again, we'll be able to also support the wider organization as well in regards to who's making decisions, how they're making decisions, and then how people are growing within the organization.
That's awesome. We've been talking a lot about tenure and people who are currently employed, and we got a question in the chat. Curiosity around tenure and engagement. Is a shorter tenure the new culture norm? Or how do we enhance our engagement to improve tenure not related to layoffs? Shireen, I'm gonna ask you to start us off on this one.
Yeah, can you repeat the first half of that question one more time?
Is a shorter tenure the new cultural norm?
So that one's really interesting because like so much of me wants to say no, culture, but I think a lot of it has become circumstantial. So I'm leaning on that word new, right? Like new to me means within the past 5 years, within the past 3 to 5 years. Yes, it's part of a cultural norm, but it's not intentional. We got hit by the pandemic. We got hit with remote work. We got hit with layoffs. We got hit with return to office after people have made shifts in childcare. There's a lot where people are now looking at their external factors as a primary driver for whether or not they're going to be able to stay with a company. So it's not that employees are like, this is no longer in my opinion, like employees are like, this company is no longer serving me. And it's become a lot of like, my external factors can no longer help me lean in to where this company is headed. We're seeing a lot of that with return to office, which I know we'll talk about later. So the other part of me wants to say no, because people miss staying with companies and building those relationships and having those teams to be a part of and those growth opportunities. You can get growth in so many ways, and in the way the question's asking, like, we're seeing growth of a lot of people are able to grow because they go to different companies, but there's kind of a craft and an art in growing in the same position in the same organization. It makes you an expert at what you're doing because you're tackling different problems in the same environment and you're growing in that way. And I would like to think people miss that. It can get exhausting having to meet new people every 2 years and having to learn an entire new business again every 2 years. I don't want to do that. And so that's why I want to lean on no. I would like to think people miss that craft in the building of yourself within an organization, within a job, and becoming truly an expert at it, as opposed to chasing that next opportunity by building new businesses. So yes, it is a new cultural norm due to what I would say external factors in the past 3 to 5 years. No, I'd like to think people miss that connectedness to their company. I hope that answers the question.
Here, I have so many thoughts. Or
Carli,
Carli,
I have thoughts.
go ahead.
No, I completely agree, Shireen. I talk to people every day with, as we're recruiting and hiring that are, when I'm asking them, what are you looking for? What are you, and I've had so many conversations where they're like, I know my resume looks like a job hopper. I know that I've moved around a lot. I don't want to keep doing that. They don't want it. They ultimately, a lot of people do want to find that home that they can kind of settle into for a longer term. And like you said, there's just been so many factors that play into that. And then on the growth opportunity, that's something that I hear all the time as well. I'm looking for growth opportunities. And so I think not just, whenever somebody's new or, exploring the potential of joining an organization, but we also need to be having those conversations when they're currently employed as well. Okay, you're looking for growth. What does that mean to you? Is that salary growth? Is that growth in responsibilities? Is that a promotion? Is that, taking on new things in addition to what you're currently doing? Because everybody's going to have a little bit of a different answer for that. So we can't assume that it's the same for everybody. And being mindful again about having those strategic conversations with the people on our team while they're currently employed and while they're engaged in doing good work is super important, rather than, when they already might be on their way out the door.
I love this. I'm going to have an unpopular opinion, so bear with me, y'all. I love this, and my heart is very aligned with what you all are saying. And at the same time, I also think when we think about millennials and Gen Z, that is very much a cultural norm, right? Again, my brain goes back to data, but 2 to 3 years is normally the max. Now, where do I think we as leaders and folks who are in this right now are able to make a change is exactly what Shireen and Carli were saying, is individuals who want to be able to stay, who want to be able to make change across that long amount of time. And at the same time, thinking about the fact that we spend more time with our colleagues and our organizations than a lot of other people in our lives, right? And so I think as leaders within organizations, we really have a responsibility to be able to say, how are we doing a great job, like the organizations that are here to make sure that we're keeping folks engaged and keeping folks here, but then also thinking through what is it that they are valuing in their career, right? Maybe it's growth, maybe it's, and I keep on going back to stats, but Deloitte shared in a study that 53% of millennials indicated that if they found the same job, they would leave their organization for a more inclusive one. That's 53% of millennials, right? And so I think something that's really important is to think through 100% what Shireen was saying of what are the external factors that individuals need and have. So again, does it have to do with their ability status? Does it have to do with their caretaking status? Does it have to do with they might be valuing remote work more now after post-COVID or still during COVID, whatnot? But then also thinking through, are we making sure that we are creating a holistic brand story that allows for individuals to want to be drawn to us and then stay with us long term? And how are we, yes, in thinking about employee engagement, but then also growth within the organization? And if that might not necessarily be a new title or new roles or responsibilities, depending on where the company is, but really thinking through what are some of those different opportunities to do some of the things that we were talking about, recognize our employees, understand what matters to them right now. And then again, really thinking through how are we tying that back to our business goals of being able to say, we want to be engaging people. I know we talked about this in our prep call, but like from point A to point Z, and then have them go tell other people where they're now at point A, and we're creating this like snowball effect essentially. But again, I think it depends on a lot of different things, and then also what the organizational structure is. But my hope is that we're all at places for like 10, 15, 20 years, and then also thinking about like the responsibility that we have as well to look at the talent market, especially as we're leaning into a time where, although there are a lot of different job opportunities, talent still aren't choosing them because they aren't aligned with their values, because they don't feel like they could work there on a day-to-day basis, or there would be room for growth. And so I think, yeah, it's important and it's interesting. And now I'm going on a rant. So Beth, I will pass it back over to you.
Don't mute yourself just yet, Sienna, because this has come up a few times when we've talked about age, we've talked about where someone is in their career. How do we make DEIB the core of our employee engagement strategy? How do we make sure that we're building this company culture that promotes engagement and a sense of belonging?
Absolutely. I mean, I think the first thing that I think about is organizational culture really goes back to workplace relationships, right? There was a study that went out, I can't think of it right now. So there was a study that went out though, that says that like we spend more time with our colleagues than we do with like our partners, our families, whatever that might be. Ideally, that's not the case, right? But thinking through what does that day-to-day workplace relationship look like, and how do we all have a sense of ownership in what the employee experience is for ourselves, our teams, and our colleagues, right? So thinking about what does that look like on a peer level, on a direct manager level, on a cross-departmental level, and on a leadership level. And really understanding what those workplace relationships are and look like. And then also thinking through, again, how are we measuring it? I think something that a lot of people struggle with is we want to make DEIB the core of our employee engagement strategy. That's great. How do we measure it? Where do we start, right? And I'm one of the things that I'm most excited about, like in what we just launched with Power Up, is thinking through exactly how to do that. So how are you measuring DEIB? How is it not just being owned by the people ops team or the DEIB team, depending on how big or advanced your organization is, and thinking through how are all of our leaders actually able to own responsibility? Because we often think about DEIB being the silo or this cloud that lives over here, versus it is the employee experience, right? Because we have a diversity of employees and a diversity of different types of employees, and then also thinking about as well, like who is having the ownership. So everyone should have some ownership, and something we've actually seen work really well is that actually being integrated in leadership KPIs, that actually being something that the C-suite has to track on, when that's actually something where you have cross-departmental leaders, either in a DEIB committee or the leaders of the ERGs also owning that ownership. And so thinking through that is like not having it be something that's siloed, but thinking through how is this being connected to each and every one of our departmental goals, cross-departmental goals, and then organizational goals as well.
Thank you. Shireen, we've got a few comments around remote work and global work. How does employee engagement work in situations where maybe most or everyone is global or remote?
I remember when I took the job at Blueboard, my former boss literally said to me, "I can't believe you're taking a remote job." And the reason that he said that to me is because I thrive off of being around people, and I'm a true extrovert. And I sit in this cute little office, 40 hours a week, and have a really hard time sometimes. The best way that I can answer this question, quite honestly, is going to be from my own experience, as opposed to speaking generally to the employee experience, because I don't know the answer. I'm living in it right now on my own and having to figure out what to do. We're about to go back into the office 3 days a week, and so much of me wishes I could be there. And I miss it a lot. Now, I'm in a fortunate situation where I'm only an hour and a half away. So the way that I've worked in it is within my first 3 weeks during the transition, I had a coach because it was a very hard transition for me. And I reached out to one of my teammates and I said, can we meet every morning at 9:30 as if we're just grabbing coffee in the kitchen? And since then, it's now been a year. We have met every morning at 9:30 in the morning to connect. And that has been something I've done. The other shift that I've seen with this organization, Blueboard in particular, is people are quite active via Slack, which was a culture shift for me. My last organization was like, keep Slacks at a minimum, don't add a lot of emojis, and here it's like, no, share. So that's been really interesting for me as someone who's so like human and touchy and like needs bodies near me. I'm like now like, oh, like I'm like trying to express that now through Slack, which has been really interesting. And then what I will say is there are tools to help. So we did partner with Donut recently, and Donut has been really good for virtual connection. Every Monday we have a donut go out through Slack and everyone shares pictures from what they did over the weekend. We have random questions that get asked on Wednesdays where we ask, what's your favorite potato? And like that chat went crazy. So like it truly is about being a bit proactive, because as I'm experiencing myself, it's a significant shift. Like I've had more of a hard time than I have not had a hard time. And I'm sure a lot of people can relate to that, because I had to choose, right? The right company, like Sienna's saying, the right company that aligns with my values and I can see growth opportunity with incredible people that were showcased in the interview process, or going into an office because it's 15 minutes closer. I'm in a fortunate situation where I have the power of choice in that circumstance. Not everybody has the power of choice, but it's tough. It's definitely tough. And Sienna, who's out in Spain, and Carli, who's at home, I'm sure they absolutely have things that they can add into this as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think so I've kind of had an interesting journey at BizLibrary, and I can kind of speak on a personal level on this as well, because I started out with BizLibrary when we were completely in office 5 days a week. You only worked remote if you had like, somebody coming to your house to like install something, or one of those occasions. And then we've gone to transition to almost a completely remote workforce. So I think one of the things to keep in mind is that you cannot underestimate the importance of communication, and not everybody's going to want to communicate in the same way. That was actually a survey that we had to send out in late 2020 to just say, like, how do you like receiving updates? How do you want to hear from the leadership team? How often do you want to hear from the leadership team? And we made changes based on what we were getting in that survey result. But yeah, I think you can't underestimate that power of communication. And then whenever you are bringing people in, on site or together for in-person events, be proactive about getting people to kind of intermingle. I think it can be really easy to just kind of stick to your immediate team and the people that you work with on a day-to-day basis. But some of the things that we do whenever we're having those in-person events is, forming breakout sessions for discussions and purposely putting people from different teams together to get kind of a mix of ideas and to get people to talking to, people that they don't necessarily talk to on a day-to-day basis, and just to kind of encouraging them to kind of mix and mingle that way too, so that they do feel those connections across the organization rather than just, within the people that they are working with on a day-to-day basis. But yeah, it's definitely a challenge sometimes to make sure that people are still feeling that engagement when everybody's in kind of their own little bubble.
I love this. This is one of my favorite topics. So for context, like Shireen mentioned, I am located in Spain, so I've actually been working remotely for over a decade now. So It's like, I'm not new to this, but it's great because like, hopefully you can share a different perspective. So also Power2Fly has always been a remote company, which I think is something, a remote company and a global company, which is something that I really value about the work that we do. So we're actually located in almost all of the continents, but definitely in Latin America, in the US, in EMEA, also in APAC. And I think something that's been really strong about building a company culture in a remote atmosphere is, number one, obviously being able to be really great at communication, being able to work asynchronously, being able to know how to also adapt to different time zones. So a great example at Power2Fly, because we are over such a range of time zones, we actually shift our org call time every quarter to be able to adapt to folks who might be in India and folks who might be in LA, right? And then also thinking through how do we do regional meetups as well. So although we might not all be able to come together for a wider retreat, for example, a couple of years ago, those of us who were living in Spain, like 12 of us got together for a weekend to be able to connect. And I think something else that's just really interesting is how do you create those connection moments where also in a remote work, everyone's thinking about work quite often, right? It's like, I reach out to you for a message about an update on our roadmap, or I reach out to you because I need a quick answer. And so similarly to what you all were sharing, really thinking about what are small ways to integrate connection. And so something that, and Beth might be able to back me up on this, but like in our team meeting, something that we do is we start off with a check-in question that has nothing to do with work, that has nothing to do with like anything related to what we're talking about, but we dedicate 10 minutes out of an hour-long meeting or 5 minutes out of a 30-minute meeting to get to know one another, to be able to really make those connections and then create that sense of belonging, which will help other people as well as we're thinking through remote work. But my 3 tips are like asynchronous communication, be able to honor your time and energy management, and then also thinking through how are you making sure also that you're in the right quote unquote rooms, right? It might be really easy to stumble into the senior leader as you're on your way to grab coffee, but you might not feel as comfortable reaching out to them on Slack, right? And so thinking about strategic ways also for engagement, and then also your own career development of how are you making sure that you're either making connections, not being afraid to reach out and just get to know other people, and then also building your rapport as well as you're growing within the organization in a way that's remote.
Such great advice. I've also heard people say that they will maybe once a week go to a co-working space just to be around other people. So they're, if there are people who are close by, they meet up, but if not, they're just, communicating. So I love all of these ideas. Now, oftentimes we hear employees complain that they don't feel engaged or, it's not enough. But we also see that they then don't take advantage of the programs that are available. So I'd love to hear from you all. What recommendations do you have on combating this? How do we get employees to engage in the employee engagement?
I mean, I'll quote Sienna, but like, ask them what they want, right? Get their buy-in. Whether that's through a survey, whether like one of the biggest things at Blueboard is like, know your team, know your employees, like ask them simply how their weekend was. If you hear that on their weekends, they go to coffee shops, on a regular basis, then maybe coffee, I said it in the chat, but maybe like a coffee date is something that they would be super interested in. Do you know your team? Do you know how they're spending their time away from work? And I think just to like chat about Blueboard a bit, one of the things that I love about it so much is that our experience offerings, our recognition program is experience-based. Our experience offerings are honestly intended for the employee to go select what they want to do. If you had a program like this, and then my manager knew that I took a pottery class on the weekend, and then thought to bring in an art class on a Thursday or a virtual art class during lunch on a Wednesday, I'm going to want to go to that, So it really comes down to knowing your team, recognizing we are humans, we are people outside of work, we have a lot of interests and hobbies that make us whole. What are those, and how can we bring them into the company so that they can see, we see you, we hear you, we know what you like, we want you to feel connected to the business through your own interest. So it's an idea, and Blueboard has taught me a lot about that too.
That's beautiful. Carli or Sienna, any thoughts around this?
Yeah, I don't know that I have too much to kind of add in addition to that. I think it kind of almost goes back to, in a way, what we were talking about earlier with the surveys. And it's not enough to collect that information, but then to communicate that out. Okay, this is what we learned, and then this is what we're going to do because of it. I think something that can happen sometimes, being in HR, being in people operations, is you know why you're doing the things that you're doing, but sometimes the employees don't always automatically make that connection because it's not what they're living and breathing every day. So you really kind of have to help draw those lines for them and really kind of over communicate that, you know, this is what we're hearing, this is what we're seeing, and this is the steps that we're taking because of what we're hearing and seeing.
Plus one, nothing to add, like make it matter to them, right? And I also think the last thing that I would just say is that oftentimes less is more. When we're thinking about fatigue, similarly to what we were talking about before with survey fatigue, the same thing, if I have to do my job and I have to attend 5 different events each week, odds are you might not have the same engagement, right? So thinking through again, like what are the small sustainable programs and systems that you can be integrating while also giving yourself time for iteration as well, right? I think sometimes we get extremely excited. We want to launch 15 million things. And then we're also in a really high season at the company. And we also have internal trainings and everything is going on. So I think thinking through what does, yes, the employee engagement strategy look like overall, but then how does that also tie into other strategies that are going on in the organization? And how do we make sure that we're doing it in a sustainable way so that on a quarterly basis, we're able to have a snapshot and say, here's everything that we have going on, the time, capacity, budget, engagement, and then being able to go from there.
Thank you all so much. You know, we just got one last question in the chat. I'm going to ask one of you to answer this. Oftentimes, team or group engagement events are centered around alcohol. Do you educate your employees on scheduling group activities that aren't centered around alcohol?
I'm happy to answer this, Sienna, unless you want to. I don't drink, and I have to put a lot of these events on. So my simple answer, so that I can give room for Sienna to answer, is I organize other events. Like Grace just said right now, a volunteer week, right? What are your events, and take a quick look at them really quick. And does alcohol need to be there? If you're having a paint and sip activity, does it have to be paint and sip? Can it just be a paint activity, right? So I think it really just comes down to the different activities that you're hosting and looking at your culture and recognizing, like, is alcohol involved in everything that we do? And are there areas in which we can take sip out of paint and sip? But Sienna, I want to give space to you if you want to add anything.
No, plus 100 million. And I know that we only have 7 minutes left. And I think something that came up when you were sharing that, Shireen, thank you for sharing your story. I think it's so important that you are in a position of leadership to be able to make those decisions, right? And so like, I want to encourage all of us, and I love it because it's like, that's something you think about. What would it look like if you had someone else doing employee engagement who might not be sober? Would that be something that comes to mind, you know? And so I think, again, the more we learn about our employees, the more we might think about that. A great example is like Ramadan recently just happened, right? And so like, if we're hosting an event or a meeting, how can we be conscious to maybe not be eating on camera or doing something that might have that impact, you know? So thinking through again, like, what are the different identities and groups that we have within our organization? What do they value? How is that aligned to our company values? And I think really leaning into that, because we even see in the interview process, like, would we grab beers with them? Are they a company fit? And it's like, is that the right question that we need to be asking, right? And so really like working with different companies, recruiters, also people in HR to be able to understand how are we mitigating some of those assumptions that we have within how we view engagement, programming, et cetera, and even our entire employee experience to be more inclusive of different types of lived experiences as well.
I love that. And if I may add, as a single mother, also pay attention to the number of after work events that you have, because not all of us, not even single parents, right? Listen, Shireen, Carli, Sienna, I want to thank you so much for sharing your time and knowledge with us today. This has been so amazing. The learning that we've received, the insight, the aha moments. I've got a page full of notes. So thank you. Before wrapping up, we wanted to encourage you to connect with BizLibrary, Blueboard, and Power to Fly to learn more about their offerings and how they can help you in your employee engagement journey. We'll be dropping some links in the chat for you to grab. And to our community members, thank you for joining us once again today. Please make sure that you're following and connecting with these organizations. I will also note that the code for SHRM credit has been listed in the chat, so you can go ahead and grab that. But again, thank you all so much for your time. Thank you for joining, and we look forward to seeing you at our next Learning Chat.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, Shireen, Carli, and Beth.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. This was so much fun.
Bye-bye.